What happens when a lie destroys an innocent man's life? When power is used as a weapon and justice is buried under wealth? But the truth always finds its way back. And when it does, revenge is inevitable. The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that weighed heavy, pressing against every wall, every breath, every heartbeat. Adrian Carter stood in the defendant's chair, his wrists still aching from the cuffs that had bound him minutes before. The past 3 years had aged him, his once sharp features now dulled by exhaustion, his eyes darkened by sleepless nights spent behind bars. The judge's voice rang through the room. "Mr. Carter, you are hereby declared not guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some were shocked. Others, those who had always believed in his innocence, closed their eyes in relief. But Adrian? He didn't react. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. Because this wasn't justice. This was only the beginning. As the gavel struck, declaring his release, his gaze slowly lifted to the woman sitting in the front row, Isabella Sinclair. The billionaire's daughter, the woman who had pointed her perfectly manicured finger at him 3 years ago and told the world the worst lie imaginable. Her face was pale now, terrified. She knew. She knew that the man walking out of this courtroom today wasn't the same man she had destroyed. Adrian was free, and he was coming for everything she had. The cold air outside the courthouse stung Adrian's skin as he stepped onto the pavement. A free man, but not the same man who had been dragged away in handcuffs 3 years ago. The reporters swarmed instantly, their voices overlapping in a frenzy. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you have anything to say to the Sinclair family? Will you be suing for damages?" Adrian didn't answer. He didn't even blink, because at that moment, none of them mattered. Only her. Isabella Sinclair stood near the courthouse steps, her designer coat wrapped tightly around her as if it could protect her from the storm she had created. Her father, Edward Sinclair, the billionaire real estate tycoon, stood beside her, his jaw clenched, his grip on her arm firm. They had come here expecting an easy win. Instead, they had lost everything. Adrian's eyes locked onto Isabella's, and for the first time in 3 years, she was the one who looked trapped. She swallowed hard, taking a hesitant step back. But before she could escape, Adrian spoke. 3 years. His voice was steady, calm, too calm. That's how long I rotted in a cell for a crime I didn't commit. The reporters fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. Isabella's breath hitched. "Adrian, He tilted his head. "You what?" Her lips trembled. She had nothing to say, because there was nothing she could say. Edward Sinclair stepped forward, his presence alone enough to make most men cower. But Adrian didn't move. "Take the verdict and move on, Carter." His voice was low, dangerous. "You got lucky today." Adrian let out a small, humorless laugh. "Lucky?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Edward and Isabella could hear. "No, Mr. Sinclair, I haven't even started yet." Isabella flinched. Edward's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Adrian smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent a chill down Isabella's spine. "Everything." And with that, he turned and walked away. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The city lights blurred through the tinted windows of the black sedan as Adrian sat in the back seat, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. The driver, a familiar face from his past, stole glances at him through the rearview mirror. "Where to, boss?" Adrian smirked at the title. 3 years ago, he had been nothing more than a driver, loyal, hard-working, invisible. But after being thrown into a cage for a crime he didn't commit, he had made a promise to himself. If the world wouldn't give him justice, he would take it himself. "The Sinclair estate," he said, his voice smooth. "It's time I paid an old friend a visit." The car pulled up to the towering gates of the Sinclair mansion, a fortress built on wealth, corruption, and well-buried secrets. Adrian knew every inch of this place. He had driven Isabella here more times than he could count, watching from behind the wheel as she lived a life of luxury while he remained in the shadows. Not anymore. The guards at the gate hesitated when they saw him step out, but he didn't wait for permission. He walked straight past them, like he owned the place. Inside, the Sinclair estate was as extravagant as ever. Gold chandeliers, marble floors, priceless paintings hanging on the walls. But for once it wasn't welcoming. It was suffocating. And at the top of the grand staircase stood Isabella. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, gripping the banister as if it could keep her from falling. Adrian took his time, letting the tension thicken between them. "I came to remind you," he said, voice dangerously calm. "You took 3 years of my life, Isabella." He tilted his head. "Now I'm taking yours." She swallowed hard. I already told my father to compensate you. We'll settle it. We'll—" Adrian chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You think I want your money?" He climbed the stairs slowly, step by step, as she backed away. "You made me a criminal, a monster. And now?" He reached the top, standing just inches from her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Now, I become the nightmare you created." The color drained from her face. Adrian leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "You took my freedom." His lips curled into a smirk. "Let's see how you survive without yours." And with those words, Isabella Sinclair finally understood. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Isabella's breath came in short, shallow gasps. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. Adrian took a step back, watching the panic flicker across her perfect, privileged face. He wanted her to feel it. The helplessness, the fear, the weight of knowing someone else held all the power. She had stolen 3 years from him. Now, he was going to take everything from her. "You're insane," she whispered, gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Adrian chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Isabella, you haven't seen insane, but you will." She swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "I already told you." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Everything." At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Edward Sinclair. The billionaire stormed into the room, his face twisted in rage. "What the hell are you doing in my house, Carter?" Adrian turned slowly, his smirk never fading. "Just catching up with an old friend." Edward's jaw clenched. "I don't know what game you're playing, but if you think you can intimidate my daughter—" Adrian held up a hand, cutting him off. "Intimidate?" "No, Mr. Sinclair. I'm not here to scare her." He smiled. "I'm here to ruin her." Isabella flinched. Edward took a threatening step forward. "I'll have you arrested again before you can even blink." Adrian let out a slow breath, then reached into his pocket. "You could try." He pulled out a small flash drive and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft clink, but the sound was deafening in the silence. Edward's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Adrian tilted his head. "Let's call it insurance." Isabella stared at the flash drive like it was a loaded gun. She knew what was on it, and when Edward Sinclair plugged it into his laptop, the truth hit him like a freight train. Video footage, audio recordings, evidence. Everything Adrian had spent 3 years collecting. Edward's face went pale. Isabella took a shaky step back. The false accusations, the legal bribes, the power moves that sent an innocent man to prison. All of it, exposed. Adrian crossed his arms, watching them crumble. "You framed me." His voice was quiet, almost amused. "And you thought I'd let it go?" Edward's hands trembled as he yanked the flash drive from the laptop. "What do you want?" he growled. Adrian smiled. "Your company." Isabella gasped. "You can't be serious." Adrian's gaze snapped to her. "You stole my life. Now, I take yours." Edward let out a hollow laugh. "You think I'd ever hand over Sinclair Enterprises?" Adrian's smirk deepened. "You won't have a choice." And with that, he turned, walking toward the door. His revenge had only just begun.